I'm Alexandra Kreis, and you're listening to Outer Travel Inner Journey. In my own search for self-understanding, I have met people from all walks of life. I bring to you a taste of these encounters. Hello, a wonderful day to everybody who is listening right now. You are listening to Outer Travel Inner Journey with Alexandra, and her current guest on the show today is Adair Finucane. Yay! Hey, Adair, how are you?
I'm so good. I have my brand new little puppy next to me, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have you on this show where I'm trying to reveal a little bit that in everybody there is a path unfolding when we start listening. And before we go into this conversation together, I'm just going to say something about you so people know who you are. So you're coming and living from Rochester in New York. Yes, you've been born there, lived there, and you're living there with your big love, James, who had to leave the room so we can record this show. And yeah, and Adair has started out as a social worker, and then kind of her big thing that we're going to talk about in a moment's time has brought her to really turn her attention to Ayurveda as well, and to wellness, to health and wellness in general, and to help people to discover whatever they need to discover to heal and integrate their life so it becomes passionate and fulfilled. Yes. So here we are with a big introduction, but there, tell us a little bit about what it was that kind of turned you from social worker to coaching and Ayurveda.
It's interesting. I struggled a lot with, you could call it a lot of different things, but a great deal of sensitivity from the time I was a little kid, really small. And that looked like rage and a lot of uncontrollable anger when I was very little, like maybe 6 years old or so. Probably before that it started. Let's back up. I got diagnosed with celiac disease when I was 3 years old, which is pretty young to get diagnosed with celiac. A lot of people can make it up to their 60s or 70s and have a lot of issues, but they don't know that they have it. So I got diagnosed quite young. My current theory is that something about the immunological stuff going on with celiac really messed with my chemical balance, maybe my emotional balance, something along those lines. This is a pretty recent theory for me. But anyways, I also wasn't able to eat the things that other kids were able to eat, and I would get sick pretty easily. So there were some things about my childhood that were very different for me than they were for my siblings, and they were very different than the other kids I was around. And my hunch is that that may have had something to do with a lot of the disturbance I experienced as a little kid, because I was capable of joy and I was raised by people who were super kind and, compassionate. I was in a really supportive environment, but my folks didn't know what to do with me. When you have a child who's rageful, and they're 6, that's not a typical state for a kid who's 6, especially if they haven't been through any explicit maltreatment. So that rage turned into depression and anxiety over time. And it never really went away. I could function very normally in school. I seemed, quote, very normal. I knew how to kind of keep it together in social environments, but I had this inner world that was extremely tumultuous. Not all the time. Again, really capable of joy, very creative, socially on point, academically on point, but a lot of pain that I lived with for a long time. And that pain was very much connected to being very sensitive to the pain in the world. I remember noticing specifically, like one example comes to mind. I think I was maybe 10, and there was a girl at the church we went to who had cerebral palsy, and she was pretty close to quadriplegic. And I remember just screaming with pain about where, like, why,
Just seeing
why
her,
does that
or
girl that she wasn't able to do what we were able to do, that like she had to be in a body like that. And my folks were empathic, but they weren't always pointing out the misfortunes of others, if you will. They weren't like focusing on it. So that was how sensitive I was. I remember being on vacation with my parents away from where this girl was and having a complete meltdown because it hurt me that she couldn't live like I could, I guess. Something like that. So that was I hope that illustrates the level of sensitivity that I experienced.
It's funny, I can so relate, and I know that my topic is, we're running into this topic trauma at this point, for those who haven't noticed, so because you are a trauma expert in kind of trying to recalibrate your life and your emotions. You kind of came across these almost like a drawer, a box where we can put people into, or the experience we had, and long-winded road back to me. I totally get what you're saying. That frustration not to be able to do what other people are doing has made me highly sensitive, and very kind of aware of looking into other people's needs, so I super relate. So how did you turn, since I gave away a little bit of your story already, so what happened really? What turned you around, or what turned you on,
Exactly. It's fascinating. Over time, I went to various different helpers, very Western approaches, and didn't get a lot of help. Was on drugs for a long, like from age 6 to age 26 or so.
Drugs?
Psychotropic. Oh yeah, thanks for clarifying. Psychotropic drugs, anti-anxiety, antidepressant, antipsychotic stuff. They didn't take me to a shaman. Come on, folks, like take me to a healer. Anyways, so I had a lot of experience with the mental health field for a long time. And it was only when I was about 22 years old, I'm 31 now. Only when I was about 22 years old, I landed at the office of a social worker named Nancy Prowell, God bless her. And she teaches, she's a psychotherapist, and she also leads people in groups to teach them dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, the idea that our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions are all very much linked, and basically mindfulness practice. So it's rooted in a lot of Buddhist and Eastern practice. And that was like, it was like I'd spent my life in a box, a tiled box, and all the boxes were, the whole thing was closed in and every surface was smooth. And it was like Nancy gave me a crowbar to start smashing up the tiles. And it's, please.
Oh yeah, what was a distinct recollection story you might want to share, so we get an idea, where was that sensation of finally freeing yourself, as I hear it?
Coping skills, learning coping skills. Do you know how mad I was when I started learning coping skills and realized that nobody had ever taught me how to breathe?
Wow. Yeah.
It's very simple stuff. Our culture is, Western culture is very sick that this isn't a part of how kids are raised. It shouldn't have taken that long. I shouldn't have been on so many drugs for so long. Those weren't really my choice. And by the time it's normal, when I'm a young adult, this is just what we do. And no offense to my family, because everybody does, I think, the best they can with the consciousness they have. And they wanted me to feel better. So
and they felt helpless, certainly. I do have the same, like if I would like to mention my family and my parents, I would always kind of think about them. Why didn't they take me to Ayurveda? If they only had known about it, and we start the blaming, and somehow, like where I arrived and where you seem to have arrived is like, at the end of the day, everybody can only take so much with the wisdom they have or the knowledge they have. And that's also part why we're doing these podcasts here, to to help people to hear that they are not alone, and that there is remedies and whatever, you know, like skills that you can attain to help yourself out of the dead end street that you feel in sometimes. So yeah, let's keep listening to you. And that sounds super, you know, like, so you learn to breathe and to cope with your anger, you know, together with this method the psychotherapist offered you.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I was really, really in bad shape at that point, like pretty passively suicidal for a couple years, like not good. Things were not good. And I got to see other people who were in similar spaces. It was a group method. So dialectical behavioral therapy is often taught as a group. They call it psychoeducation rather than therapy itself, which is beautiful because it depathologizes the stuff that we're going through. And these were, you know, adults who had kids, grown kids, and everybody in the mix. It was really grounding to be in a space where what I was dealing with wasn't unusual. My level of distress was pretty on par with the other people. And I just got to learn, like, oh, right, if you smell lavender oil and you just focus on it, that feels better. And so DBT, there's like 50 skills or something, and you have checklists, and every day you fill out your checklist, and it's very consistent, and you get to track your progress. So I had that amazing experience with a social worker. And that was like somebody gave me the keys back.
Wow.
I don't know that it was so, I can't recall how extreme the shift was at the time. It happened over time. I think I did 3 rounds of 8-week rounds of the same program. You know, I stuck with it because I loved it. And I had been practicing yoga at that point since I was about 18. So I was familiar with yoga. I've always been interested in, I guess you could call it the occult and alternative approaches. And I got just more into my yoga and more into meditation. And it took me a bit of time. I was non-traditional and finishing my undergraduate work. But eventually, when I was about 25, I finished a bachelor's in science and psychology from a great school, SUNY Geneseo in New York. I had to work really hard. There were lots of really smart people there. It was wonderful to be super challenged. I finished that and then applied right away to do a master's in social work program. So I was probably about 26 at that time. And I just knew that I've been very active in the activism world in a lot of different areas, workers' rights and environmental justice and LGBTQ stuff. So I've been in that shake it up world, and I figured, well, if I'm gonna try to change the world, if I'm inspired by this woman and I want to maybe do that, or if I'm going to be doing some kind of community organizing, I might as well be paid to do it at work instead of work hard at some job and then do it in my off time. So that was my approach. Like, yeah, I think I can swing this. But I went to social work school and was very aware of how poor the working conditions are for social workers in a traditional track in the United States.
You pay quite a lot of, you pay quite a lot of money, you know, I mean, this is a European kind of US / podcast, but I mean, I'm located here, and this is like something we can get through university without having to pay for it. But I have a friend who recently graduated as a social worker, and it's enormous what you have to put in. And then you come out and you don't even get the, you know, the credit for doing that kind of work, having taken your own kind of power, your money power, your manifestation power. And then you're being paid, you know, let's call it shit, you know, for what I've noticed. Is that true? Yeah.
It's completely on point.
Yeah.
And, you know, the money, if things go well, is in private practice, which is difficult because folks who are offering private practice usually aren't as able, and it depends on how they run it, but aren't as able to serve the populations who are most in need, which isn't all. There's a big debate in the social work world because it's called social work. It's that our values are very grounded in serving those who have access to less. So that's been a very interesting internal dialogue for me in terms of following my dharma, honoring the profession that I chose. And yes, I'm in a lot of debt. And I'll say this for YHC, I am paying it off very fast because I started my own business. And that has to be part of the dharma. We have to take care of ourselves.
Yes. So for those listeners who don't know what YHC is, it's Adair and I am in the same, or she is in the program that I have left behind now a few years, which is like yoga health coaching. And it's inspired by Kate Stillman, who not so much helps us to learn coaching, because most of us have really knack for understanding people, asking good questions, but in how to position ourselves in a community. And what I heard you saying as a parallel to that, when you met the first psychotherapist, and the way you engaged with it is very much what we're trying to offer people who come to us from free will and not feeling so sick sometimes as you did or as I did, but to come and do something in an embedment of hearing other people, feeling seen and heard and supported for more than just 6-8 weeks, but really going into deepening the stuff. Because let's hear the result. What happened with you after you kind of found the crowbar? What happened really to you? And you kind of started studying and everything. What is it you turned on to?
Isn't it funny how some of the most uncomfortable experiences of our lives can bring such huge joy and clarity?
Yes. While we're in it, we can't see it, no?
Right? I had this relationship while I was in grad school, and the person I was with taught me a lot about my own self-worth, and just so much about what I needed to learn right then. And it was hard. And the cool thing is that he turned me on to Kundalini Yoga.
Yeah.
And Kundalini Yoga was the next crowbar. Kundalini Yoga has an amazing ability to regulate our neurotransmitters. It changes our body chemistry and our mind chemistry in a way that nothing ever has. And that's when I got off of any kind of psychotropic medication for the first time, pretty much ever. I don't take, I don't take meds anymore, and I haven't for many years. I started to get into a Kundalini Yoga practice during school because it was hard. I was watching all these social workers struggle. I was struggling in my own internships, just figuring out how to do it, and learning a lot about trauma. It was very traumatizing to learn a lot about trauma. Very difficult program for many reasons. Way too much is expected of students. It's so hard to learn in a stress when we're fully stressed all the time. It's not helpful. Anyways, I found this practice on Glow. It's an app online with one particular teacher named Kia Miller, and I started doing it every day. I started my first 40-day practice of a Kundalini Yoga meditation, which is breath and energy work. And that was like, I exploded out of the box. Talk about superpower. I was like, oh my gosh, the energy that has been in a funnel going to the center of the earth, this energy that I have that I had no concept of how to control, because we're not raised understanding chi, understanding prana in a Western world, unless we were, which most of us weren't. I started to realize that I could direct my energy. And that intensity that I explained from childhood, it turned into joy a lot more. It turned into power. Even if I wasn't comfortable, I was at least able to transmute and alchemize what I was moving through. And I started to process a lot of old junk. And thank goodness I had that relationship, right? Because this particular person introduced me to Kia. I finished school. I did a 2-year program. I had no money, and somehow I ended up, by the grace of God, being offered some money by my folks, and then money came from somewhere else, and I wrote a letter to Kia asking for a scholarship because she had a yoga teacher training at the Himalayan Institute in Pennsylvania, just 3 hours from my house. which is close because she lives in LA and she trains people in India most of the time. Like, it was very convenient that I was able to drive. And I got to do a 3.5-week immersive training, 200 hours in Kundalini Yoga and Vinyasa. And at that point, I'd ended that relationship, thank goodness. I was doing some big healing around that. And I realized that I was not intended to go on a traditional social work path, that everything I learned was tremendously valuable. You know, I got trained as a EMDR therapist. EMDR is eye movement desensitization and retraining or reprocessing. It's a phenomenal trauma therapy. I got really well trained in all the trauma stuff. I got to have an intern or a assistantship, which I still kind of keep, with a phenomenal professor who was a midwife, and just learned a ton of things. And I have these bags, these amazing bags of information packed with my yoga stuff and everything. And I'm like, I'm not going to work at an agency. This is not my path. However, I love social workers. I love healers. I love helpers, and I want them to be well. So my bags are packed with all the good stuff, really with the goal of empowering anybody who's in a healer position to be able to care for themselves well enough to care for others. And that's fun because I have to every single day check in and say, am I doing what I'm asking people to do? And generally the answer is yes. And if it's not, it's a quick correction, because you're full of shit if you think you can tell people to take care of themselves and not take care of yourself.
And as it is with healing and with everything that we teach and we engage with, I mean, as the path unfolds, as I always say, you know, like as you already mentioned, the superpower, that part that we always do, and sometimes it feels like the wrong thing to do, and then it becomes actually, if we able to transmute it, transform it into its own power, so it doesn't backlash on us all the time, it becomes the path. And I feel so, you know, at that moment in point, I feel so connected to what you're saying, because what I've learned and what I've also read recently in one of the yoga bigger texts is like, you know, someone has to teach to understand the way. And I think this is what we find ourselves a lot reaching out, if you're a social worker or if you're, you know, as somebody in a helper position, that first of all, in order for you to understand yourself, you kind of start to, you know, try to help other people. It's almost like mirror work, constant mirror work. And the only way that I feel you distinguish yourself from maybe other people who are not so driven to, you know, heal themselves as much as they're trying to help others, is like exactly that point where we're seeing this as a self-reflection first. And in this knowing, we can suddenly take charge and turn away from systems that are broken. Unfortunately, that's everywhere. You know, I mean, I left social work for the very same reason, you know, because it's a broken system, and people who have so much heart get hurt even more in my eyes, you know, or, you know, they don't get valued as they should. And that's unfortunate. But you kind of ended up with this kind of taste of like, I know now what trauma is, and hence I know how to help people. Yes, that kind of said. So I see you more or less as a trauma expert, you know, from how I got to know you. If you want to kind of elaborate a little bit on that topic.
I appreciate that. It's very interesting because I see myself as someone with a lot of expertise around trauma, but you may have had the experience, and I love to talk about it, and I'm happy to educate people about it. I'm not trying to downplay my understanding because it's pretty thorough. However, when you're swimming in the big ocean next to the big fishes, I don't mind not being a trauma expert. I'll let the people that I get to co-author with keep that, even though they don't even take that title all the time, because I have amazing mentors who say, yeah, expertise is good. If I'm an expert, it's more of an identity, right? Listen to me, I'm the expert.
Yes, and you are. And I think we can have ownership or agency, I think you say, and I hear that a lot, you know, that we have agency for the things that are happen to us, in order for us, if we are on the right path, to pass on to other people. And I mean, I don't mean like, I know we often see experts as the people with a doctor annotation, with the title and with the book offerings, but as such, I think you are an expert, you know, like as somebody who really lived a life, you know, and you walk the walk. And so yeah, you're coming out and finding yourself in these conversations. That's what I hear, you know, about trauma.
Yeah, it's no accident, for sure. Something very interesting. So the ICD-10 is what the World Health Organization uses to classify psychological diseases, or whatever you want to call it, disorders. And the American Psychological Association, they're pretty on par with each other. And according to both, what I experienced as a kid and throughout my young adult life doesn't actually count as trauma, because, well, assuming that only trauma could cause PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So there's this contingency factor. There's certain things that, quote, count, and there's certain things that don't, which in one sense, who gives a fuck? And in the other sense, like who, yeah, whatever. And in the other sense, it actually matters because of how systems work and what's reimbursed and what's validated and what isn't, you know? So there's plenty of reasons why people want to keep certain boundaries constrained, or else we'll have people saying that, oh, you made me go to school, it's traumatic, right? You know, there's that they call it bracket creep. However, the woman I work with, Mickey Spurlick, my amazing mentor, the midwife turned social work researcher, she got into studying trauma nuts and bolts because she discovered that emotional abuse and neglect, neither of those count as precursors to PTSD. It doesn't, quote, count. So it's very interesting. It's taken me years to recognize that my experience counts as trauma, because if you look at all the tools that social workers typically use or psychologists typically use to denote what people have been through in order to treat them, I don't have almost any of the ACEs. They're called adverse childhood experiences. Those are you know, specific list of things that can lead to negative health outcomes for adults. You know, my folks were together. We had enough to eat. I lived in a safe place. I lived in a loving family, loving extended family, had good friends, right? My life looked so normal.
Yeah.
In the supportive sense. And yet, I really went through a lot. And it's only been really when you facilitated a call that I did for the yoga health coaching program not long ago, and even sharing my story there, I had another layer of stepping into truth around, oh, this is so real. And even now I feel it again, like it's very affirming just to be able to say, oh, that's real. And to be witnessed and realize, oh, none of these people think I'm just some complaining, you know, middle-class white girl, right? That's not the appearance, but isn't that interesting that might be something that's my, you know, the old inner dialogue. There's nothing wrong. You're fine. Get over it. Not that I want to keep that thought, but those are things that will come up and I have to chop their heads off.
Yeah, and it's what lies in between the lines. I mean, when I did social work way back in the days, and I was just helping young people to build their last step into independency, because they weren't allowed to live by themselves. So they lived in this, you know, like apartment together, shared apartment. And what I didn't realize for a very long time, how difficult that work was, because there was no specific thing happening with these people, but they were all deeply traumatized. They came from backgrounds where they didn't tell the stories fully because they didn't think it was something special. And suddenly stuff would kind of happen. Like my favorite story is about like this guy coming into my apartment, or coming into the apartment with a gun and thinking that it's like, you know, like, I need to have that folder of you and need to know what's written about my girlfriend here. And I'm like, what's going on? You know, and so shocking to be in these situations. And I hear you saying that. So I'm super curious how you, you know, almost like unveiled this this word for you and this process for you. So what was it really that opened you up to say like, yes, this still, even if it's, you know, not classically defined as trauma, what has you made become clear? That's interesting.
You know what it was? It was my teacher, Kia. I started doing advanced training with her last 2 years ago, maybe, I think I went. And we were doing shadow work. And she asked all of us, we were just diving into our stuff, right? As people do at yoga teacher trainings and that kind of space. And she asked us to share with the group of about 16 to 17 people a statement that was true about ourselves. After we'd done all this processing and spending time, and the thing I said, which is so powerful, and I'm still working with it, is there is nothing wrong with me. And the release that came from that, you know, and of course being in a space that's so unbelievably sacred and supportive was amazing, because I had a very, very strong emotional reaction. I mean, when I have a big reaction, I'll blow the roof off a place. So for me to feel safe enough to do that is such a gift. So I had these people holding the space for me, and Kia, I was really just losing it in the best way, like in the way that a lot of us who love to process our stuff and love to heal. It's like, oh yes, I get to like scream and cry and lose it, have a physiological freak out release. She came over to me, and she may have put her hand on my back or something, and I think I said something like, this isn't how, like something along the lines of denying myself, saying that this is trauma. I think I said something like, this isn't trauma, how could it be? And she's like, this is trauma. And here I am, you know, trauma researcher, I ought to know, right? And I couldn't even honor my own stuff. And she just put her hand there and said, yes, it is.
Wow. Thank you for being so vulnerable. It reminds me of that I can be very explosive in emotions in a safe place. And thank you for putting this out. This is like huge for me, because I think, like, I was recently asked about, like, you know, yeah, you seem to be pretty head on and, you know, logic, you know, but and then I ask you something and then something comes out and then it goes hiding again. And the truth is, and I think this is what we're trying to all break down in yoga, health coaching and yoga healer, that we trust our emotions. And even though we don't need to constantly live them on display for everybody else to have to deal with them, but that so many emotions are unwelcomed, you know, and this is like what I hear as well, which is a defining moment for you in this relationship with this person who kind of brought this forward and out for you, you know, that it's, that we need to see our emotions more clearly instead of just logically.
And that's an everyday process. That's every day. I'm doing some wonderful work with Layla Martin right now, not with her one-on-one, but in a program of hers. She's a sacred sexuality and relationship coach, fourth or fifth wave, whatever you want to call it, feminism or womanism. She's pushing a new envelope for sexual revolution in this really beautiful, inclusive way. And even though I have access to lots and lots of programming for her, I keep coming back to her first guided meditation, which isn't even about a pleasure practice or anything. It's just some breath work, and it's really mostly a meditation. And the way she asks the participant to invite what is. You know, we most of us have heard that, oh, right, like invite your emotions and let them be here, but there's different layers. And most mornings I'll just listen to that and just breathe and really invite what is, and like love my body as a temple and really be in whatever space I'm in and just love it. Like, this is a fucking miracle. And that's it, all the emotions, anything, or if you're not feeling something, that's welcome here, all of it. And I just want to, for anyone who's listening, like remind us all that we can do that every day, and we would probably benefit from it, because it's really easy to shut that stuff down and it doesn't help.
Snap, totally snap, you know. I mean, this is like synchronicity all over, you know. This is like what I'm working on every morning these days, you know, just to embrace life and love life. And, you know, you might think that it's woo-woo if you're listening, you know, like, oh yeah, I do that anyway. And maybe you love your work, and maybe you do love the engagement, but I think at the root of all the classical traditions, you know, like if we look into Buddhism, which you mentioned, you know, in all these Asian tradition of awakening or trying to reconnect with yourself, it's they never say like it's just one aspect of your life, but the sheer joy of just noticing how your bed feels, or, you know, like how the sun is coming in, or that you're not liking how the sun is coming in. All this is actually what they are pointing towards. And you might find yourself, you know, being awakened by, I don't know, Adair is being awakened by a lot of different tools. That's what I hear, you know, like a lot of processes, and not so much with the one thing. Or is this still for you the Kundalini practice, or what is it you know, or is it just you really go for it until you find where you need to work next?
I was just writing about this the other day. I love being able to post on social media this stuff, you know, to share these things. I was reflecting because I thought Kundalini Yoga was it. You know now how powerful it was. I mean, truly saved my life. I figured for the rest of my life, I presume I will do this practice, because it's not an unreasonable presumption. Many people do get very stuck. Not even, they might get stuck with it, but they stick with it. And I just keep being delighted over and over again by my powerful negative mind that doesn't quite trust any teacher fully, even though it recognizes that people are human, right? Yes. And I have one Kundalini Yoga teacher. I'm not interested in the big world of Kundalini Yoga. I have one particular teacher. There's a lot of messed up stuff about that world, and I do trust her, right? For good reason. Yes. So I have Kate, who's a phenomenal teacher, Kate Stillman. I have all these different constellation points that I pull from, and it keeps me very safe. It keeps me very safe, because I wouldn't be drawn to those teachers if I didn't know with my heart, soul, and gut that I was supposed to be with them. And they're not gonna be there forever. And I must be able to do it. I have to be my own teacher. I haven't had, until very recently, I hadn't embraced any local yoga teachers. I've been, quote, my own teacher for many years because I would do Kia's online classes. She's the only one I wanted to hang out with, and she wasn't in person. And I just learned, stick with your gut, stay close to your friends who know you, keep processing and asking them, what do you see here? You know, I think I'm on the path. Am I missing something? And they tell me. Usually they're like, no, you're doing great. And always be willing to, I believe in always being willing to stop a practice. Never think that you have to do a practice in order to be on the path, because that's just attachment, and it will lead to confusion. So sometimes I've been a little flippant and maybe even violent with myself in terms of cutting off certain paths, but it's like, I want to know that I'm good with my core, not because it's just a tool or a practice. And I'm the lady with 7,000 bags saying, hey, I got a practice for you. I love practices, but I don't believe that we should always carry them everywhere we go, no matter what. It's great to see what actually lasts when you wake up and do nothing that day. usually I feel like crap after a certain point. So I decided to do the practice the next day, but so important to give ourselves that freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, amen. So when your practice becomes so disciplined that you think you're doing a bad thing if you don't do it, but you don't know how it really feels, that's where you start the process truly. And that's also my view of things. Totally. Say amen to that.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, and we have to do that. We have to go too far, and we have to get too disciplined, and we have to get undisciplined, and somewhere in between there we get to be alive and hopefully happy.
So do we, that you, sweet listener, who's been sitting with us for a while, feel alive and happy and encouraged to reach out, maybe to Adair, maybe to me. Adair, where can we find you and your specific kind of field of expertise and whatever you have to give to whoever is ready to take it?
Oh my gosh, I'd love to talk to I want to talk to anybody.
I talk to anybody.
You can find me at withadair.com, withadair.com. All of my other venues of reaching me are there. You can find me on Instagram too at withadair.
Yeah, and even if you just want to follow her, it's so lovely to be in the extraordinary life with Adair, isn't it?
Being Extraordinary is my program.
Yeah, it's like, it's a super sweet Facebook site. I love seeing your process there. And we're going to put the links underneath in the show notes, so you don't need to put your pen and paper. You can put it down and you will get all the links. But yeah, if you're interested to see what she does and how she develops, do click and like it. I like it a lot. So thank you for taking time, Adair, and for being so open and vulnerable, and for helping us all along in this exchange that it really is that we have with each other instead of just with ourselves.
Oh no, we're so not alone. Thank you so much. This is the kind of thing that just lights me up. I'm going to have a phenomenal day with my puppy because puppy, but really because we got to have this conversation. You just made me so happy by having this conversation. Thanks.
And you made me happy. That's what I love. That's what I love about the exchange in these podcasts. It's never to me just a presentation. It's just like the exchange and what comes up out of these conversations. Thank you for being a good sport and coming along.
Always fun.
See you next time, dear listener. Bye.
Bye.
If you enjoy listening to my podcast, please consider to become a patron at patreon.com/Alexandra Kreis and pledge your donation.